The massive chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with the usual sounds of diplomacy. 347 different species sat in their assigned seats, speaking through translators that turned their words into the common language everyone could understand. The air recyclers worked overtime to handle the different breathing needs of so many alien races. Ambassador Sarah sat quietly in the human section. She had been representing Earth for almost a year now, but she still felt out of place among all these ancient civilizations. Some of the species around her had been traveling between stars when humans were still learning to make fire. The council chairman, a tall creature called Al from the hegemony, stood at the center podium. His blue skin gleamed under the chamber lights as he raised his four arms for silence. The chatter died down as hundreds of eyes, stalks, and sensor organs focused on him. "Fellow council members," Al began, his voice carrying easily through the translation system, "we face another crisis that requires our immediate attention." Leaned forward slightly. In her year here, she had learned that crisis usually meant someone was fighting someone else, and the council would spend months talking about it until both sides got tired and agreed to share whatever they were fighting over. "The species known as the Devourers have returned from the outer edge of our galaxy," the chairman continued. "Long-range scouts report that they have already consumed 3 inhabited worlds in the outer territories." A wave of concerned murmurs rippled through the chamber. Felt her blood run cold. She had read the files on the Devourers during her briefing for this position. They were a nomadic race that literally ate planets, stripping them of all life to fuel their massive bioships. They had been doing this for thousands of years. "How many dead?" asked Ambassador Oz from the warrior caste, his deep voice cutting through the nervous chatter. "Current estimates suggest approximately 3 billion sentient beings have been consumed," Al replied with the same tone he might use to discuss lunch plans. Gripped her chair arms so hard her knuckles went white. 3 billion people, dead, eaten alive, and the chairman sounded like he was reading a grocery list. "As per our established protocols," Al continued, "we will immediately dispatch a diplomatic mission to establish contact with the Devourers. We must begin negotiations to determine suitable territorial boundaries and resource allocation agreements that will satisfy their needs while protecting our member worlds." The chamber filled with approving sounds from dozens of different species. Heard clicking, humming, and various electronic beeps that her translator turned into words like wise, proper procedure, and diplomatic solution. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "We will offer them uninhabited systems in the frontier zone," announced Mediator Supreme Al, a jellyfish-like creature who handled most of the council's peace talks. "Perhaps we can also arrange for artificial food sources that would meet their nutritional requirements." More approving sounds. Realized that these aliens actually thought they could negotiate with creatures that had just murdered 3 billion people. "The humans have been quiet during this discussion," observed Counselor and from his security station. "Ambassador, does Earth have any input on this matter?" The chamber fell silent as hundreds of alien gazes turned toward her. Stood up slowly, her hands shaking with anger she was trying very hard to control. "The Terran Federation does not negotiate with mass murderers," she said clearly. The translation system made several error sounds. Confused murmurs filled the chamber. Chairman Al's 4 arms waved in what had learned was the hegemony gesture for confusion. "I apologize, Ambassador, but there seems to be a translation error. Could you repeat your statement?" Took a deep breath and spoke again, making sure every word was crystal clear. "The Terran Federation does not negotiate with mass murderers. We will stop them." The chamber went dead silent. Could hear the hum of the life support systems and the quiet beeping of translator devices as they processed her words correctly. Chairman Al made a nervous sound that the translator turned into laughter. "Surely there's been some misunderstanding," Ambassador. The Devourers are a recognized species with legitimate needs. All conflicts in civilized space are resolved through diplomatic channels. We find mutually beneficial solutions that allow all parties to coexist peacefully. Mr. Chairman said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber, my species has a saying, evil triumphs when good people do nothing. She looked around at all the alien faces staring at her in confusion and growing alarm. You call yourselves civilized, but you're about to sit down and negotiate with creatures that just ate 3 billion people alive. You're going to offer them more worlds to destroy, more people to murder, just so they'll agree to do it somewhere you don't have to watch. The silence stretched on. Could see aliens looking at each other with expressions she was learning to recognize as concern and confusion. Ambassador, Al said carefully, I understand this may be difficult for your species to comprehend, but we have maintained galactic peace for over 10,000 years through diplomatic solutions. Violence only breeds more violence. We must find a way for the Devourers to meet their needs without unnecessary conflict. Stared at him for a long moment. Then she did something no ambassador had ever done in the recorded history of the Galactic Council. She turned her back on the chairman and walked toward the exit. Ambassador, please return to your seat, Al called after her. We must discuss this rationally. Stopped at the chamber doors and turned back to face the assembly. Every alien in the room was staring at her, with expressions ranging from shock to horror to complete bewilderment. Mr. Chairman, members of the council, she said, her voice echoing in the vast space. I've heard enough. The human species does not negotiate with child killers. We don't make deals with mass murderers. And we certainly don't reward genocide with territory and resources. She paused, letting her words sink in. We've been listening to your peaceful solutions for a year now. We've watched you negotiate with pirates, slavers, and planet burners. Every time, you give them what they want and call it peace. Meanwhile, people die. The chamber remained frozen in stunned silence. Humanity has a different approach to evil. We stop it. Ambassador Sarah walked out of the Galactic Council chamber, leaving 346 alien species in complete shock behind her. For the first time in 10,000 years, someone had just declared war not for territory, not for resources, but for justice. And none of them knew what to do about it. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been going for 6 hours straight. The massive chamber was packed with representatives from every major species in the galaxy, all trying to understand what had just happened with the humans. Dr. On stood at the central podium, his tentacles nervously adjusting his data pad as hundreds of alien eyes focused on him. As the council's leading expert on alien psychology, everyone was looking to him for answers about human behavior. Honored council members, he began, his voice shaking slightly through the translation system. I have completed my emergency analysis of human psychological patterns based on all available data from their first year among us. Chairman Al leaned forward in his seat. And what did you discover, Doctor? On's tentacles twitched in what his species showed when delivering bad news. The humans appear to suffer from a severe psychological disorder that affects their entire species. Gasps and concerned murmurs filled the chamber. Several representatives began talking at once until the chairman called for order. Please explain, Doctor, Al said. The humans demonstrate a complete inability to separate their survival instincts from abstract moral concepts, On continued, reading from his data. When they encounter what they classify as evil, their stress hormone levels spike to dangerous levels. Their heart rates increase, their muscles tense, and their brain activity shows patterns consistent with permanent combat readiness. He paused to let this sink in before continuing. Most disturbing of all, this reaction appears to be stronger when the evil in question affects people they don't even know. A human will become more aggressive about protecting strangers than some species become when defending their own offspring. The chamber erupted in shocked chatter. Ambassador Oz from the warrior caste stood up, his massive frame towering over his seat. "Are you saying the humans are permanently in a state of war?" he asked. "Not exactly," On replied, his tentacles waving nervously. "They can be quite peaceful when not confronted with what they consider moral violations, but when they perceive injustice, they seem incapable of considering compromise or negotiation. Their entire thought process shifts to problem elimination." Meanwhile, in the human section of the galaxy, Admiral Maria stood in the command center of the Earth Defense Force flagship Indomitable. Around her, dozens of officers worked frantically at their stations, coordinating the largest fleet mobilization in human history. "Status report," she commanded. 67 ships ready for immediate departure," replied Captain Jackson, her second in command. "Another 130 can be ready within 12 hours. Long-range scouts are already moving toward Devourer space." Admiral nodded grimly. She had been expecting this day ever since humanity joined the Galactic Council. The aliens meant well, but they didn't understand that some problems couldn't be solved with talking. "Ma'am," interrupted Lieutenant Commander Singh from the communications station, "we're receiving urgent messages from the Galactic Council. They're demanding we stand down and respect established protocols." The Admiral looked at the message scrolling across her screen. It was the same diplomatic language she had been reading for months. Words like mutual understanding, peaceful resolution, and respect for established procedures. "Any word from our intelligence assets?" she asked, ignoring the Council's messages. "Yes, ma'am," Singh replied, his voice tight with anger. "The Devourers finished consuming new prime this morning. Estimated population was 2.3 billion. They're already moving toward the system." Felt her jaw clench. New Prime had been home to families, children, artists, teachers, people with hopes and dreams and futures. Now they were nothing but fuel for alien monsters, while the Galactic Council prepared to offer those same monsters a nice territory where they could keep murdering in peace. "Set course for the frontier," she ordered. "Maximum speed." "Ma'am, that puts us in direct violation of Council space law," Captain Jackson warned. "We're supposed to wait for diplomatic authorization." Turned to face her crew. Every human in the command center was looking at her with the same expression of barely controlled rage that she felt burning in her own chest. "The Galactic Council has had 10,000 years to solve the Devourer problem," she said. "In that time, these creatures have killed over 40 billion people while the Council negotiated territorial concessions and resource-sharing agreements." She paused, looking each of her officers in the eye. "This month alone, while the Council prepared for another round of peace talks, 3 billion people died. That's more than the entire population of Earth in the 21st century. Gone, eaten alive while diplomats debated proper procedure." The command center was dead silent, except for the hum of ship systems. "We took an oath to protect innocent life," continued. "Not to protect Council protocols, not to preserve diplomatic traditions, to protect people who can't protect themselves." She turned back to the main screen, which now showed the tactical display of human fleet movements. "The mathematics are simple. Every day we spend talking is another day the Devourers spend killing. The Council wants to give them a territory where they can murder people legally. We're going to give them something else." Back on the Council station, Dr. On was still trying to explain human psychology to increasingly worried alien representatives. "The truly concerning aspect," he continued, "is that humans seem to view compromise with aggressive species as a form of collaboration with evil. They appear completely incapable of understanding why anyone would negotiate with what they consider murderers." "But surely they must understand practical necessity," interrupted Mediator Al. The Devourers are too powerful to simply fight. We must find a peaceful solution. That's exactly what I mean, On replied, his tentacles writhing in distress. Humans don't seem to recognize the concept of too powerful to fight when it comes to what they call evil. Their historical records show them consistently attacking enemies much stronger than themselves purely for moral reasons. Chairman Al was beginning to look seriously worried. Doctor, in your professional opinion, what are the humans likely to do about the Devourer situation? On consulted his data pad one more time, then looked up at the assembled council with an expression of absolute terror. Based on their psychological patterns and historical behavior, the humans are going to try to kill every single devourer in the galaxy, he said quietly. And they're not going to negotiate, compromise, or accept any peaceful surrender. The chamber fell into stunned silence as the implications sank in. They view the devourers as a moral problem that needs to be solved permanently, On continued, not a political issue to be managed through diplomacy. At that moment, emergency alarms began blaring throughout the council station. Security Chief N's voice came over the communication system, tight with panic. All council members to emergency stations. Long-range sensors have detected the human fleet moving at maximum speed toward Devourer space. They are not responding to our cease and desist orders. In the chaos that followed, one thought echoed through the minds of every alien present. For the first time in 10,000 years, someone was about to solve a galactic problem with violence instead of conversation. And none of them knew if that was a good thing or the beginning of the end of civilization as they knew it. The space around the system had become the most watched location in the galaxy. Dozens of council ships floated in the neutral zone, their sensors recording everything as the human fleet approached the feeding grounds, where the devourers were finishing their consumption of another world. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the tactical display as her ships moved into position. The Devourer bioships were massive, organic vessels that looked more like living creatures than spacecraft. Even from this distance, she could see them extending their feeding tendrils down to the planet's surface, sucking up the last remnants of what had once been New Prime. "Ma'am, we're receiving multiple hails from the Council Mediation Fleet," reported Lieutenant Commander Singh. "They're demanding we hold position for diplomatic talks." "Put them through," ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing Mediator Supreme Al floating in his tank aboard the Council's flagship. Behind him, representatives from 12 different species looked on with expressions ranging from worry to outright panic. "Admiral," Al began, his translated voice carrying the formal tone of official council business. "You are in direct violation of 17 galactic accords. I must insist you halt your advance immediately." "Noted," replied curtly. "Is there anything else?" The jellyfish-like alien's tentacles twitched with confusion. "Admiral, we have established contact with the Devourer Collective. They have agreed to enter negotiations. This is exactly the kind of breakthrough we've been working toward for centuries." "What are their terms?" asked, though her tone suggested she already knew she wouldn't like the answer. "They are willing to limit their feeding to uninhabited star systems," Al said with obvious pride in the diplomatic achievement. "In exchange, we would provide them with territorial rights to the entire frontier zone and assistance in locating suitable worlds for their needs." Stared at the screen for a long moment before responding. "Mediator, they killed 3 billion people yesterday. 3 billion. While you were setting up this meeting, they were eating children alive." "Admiral, I understand this is emotionally difficult," Al replied in the patient tone diplomats used with difficult negotiators. "But we must think practically. The Devourers require organic matter to survive. By channeling their feeding toward uninhabited worlds, we can save countless lives while respecting their legitimate biological needs." "Their legitimate needs." His voice was dangerously quiet, Mediator, with all due respect, I don't care what they need. They're murderers. We don't negotiate with murderers. The screen split to show Chairman Al joining the call from the council chambers. His 4 arms gestured frantically as he spoke. Admiral, please reconsider. The Devourers have existed for thousands of years. They are a recognized species with rights under galactic law. Yes, their feeding habits are regrettable, but extinction is not the answer to species incompatibility. Looked out at the tactical display, where Devourer bioships continued their feeding while Council mediators tried to arrange a peaceful solution. She thought about the families that had lived on New Prime just days ago. Teachers and farmers and doctors and children who would never grow up because aliens needed to eat. Mr. Chairman, she said finally, I want you to watch very carefully what happens next. I want you to record it and show it to every species in the council. Admiral, please, Al began. A rabid dog doesn't stop being rabid because it promises to bite fewer people, cut him off. And we don't make deals with child killers. She turned to her weapons officer. Target all Devourer vessels. Prepare to fire. Wait, the screen now showed 3 more council mediators all speaking at once. Admiral, the Devourers are broadcasting surrender signals. They're offering to withdraw beyond the galactic rim. They'll accept exile to a single star system. Please, they're trying to surrender. Watch the display as the massive bioship suddenly began broadcasting on multiple frequencies. Her translation systems picked up the desperate messages. Offers of complete withdrawal, acceptance of any terms, promises to enter permanent stasis rather than face extinction. For the first time in their species' existence, the Devourers were experiencing fear. Admiral, Captain Jackson said quietly, they're begging. I've never seen anything like it. They're offering complete submission. Nodded slowly. She had heard the transmissions. The creatures that had spent thousands of years casually consuming entire civilizations were now pleading for their lives like the billions of people they had murdered. Captain, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the bridge, in human military doctrine, what do we do with an enemy that surrenders? Jackson straightened. We accept their surrender and treat them according to the laws of war, ma'am. And what do we do with mass murderers who surrender? The captain was quiet for a moment, understanding dawning in his eyes. We arrest them, ma'am, and then we try them for their crimes. That's right, said. But tell me, Captain, where exactly are we supposed to imprison creatures the size of battleships that need to eat planets to survive? The bridge fell silent except for the hum of ship systems. Every human present understood the impossible logic of the situation. The Devourers aren't soldiers, people, announced to her crew and the listening council mediators. They're not even really a species in any sense we can negotiate with. They're a plague, a natural disaster with intelligence. She turned back to the screen, where desperate alien diplomats were still pleading for restraint. You can't imprison a hurricane, she continued. You can't rehabilitate a virus, and you can't negotiate with a force of nature that exists to kill people. The Devourer bioships were now trying to flee, their massive forms accelerating away from the system with what looked like genuine panic. But human ships had already surrounded them with surgical precision. All ships, broadcast on the Fleet Command frequency. The children of New Prime will never go home again. The families of 3 billion people will never be reunited. 40 billion people across the galaxy died, while the Council spent centuries trying to find a peaceful solution to mass murder. She paused, watching as her ships moved into final position. Today that ends. All ships, you are weapons-free. The space around system erupted in light as human weapons opened fire. The Council mediators watched in horror as the Devourer bioships tried desperately to escape, still broadcasting surrender offers and peace terms even as human projectiles tore through their hulls. They're surrendering, Mediator Al screamed through the communication link. You can't just kill them while they're surrendering. Looked directly into the camera as the last of the Devourer vessels was reduced to debris. "Mediator," she said calmly, "my species has a simple rule. Some things don't get to surrender. Mass murderers who kill children don't get to surrender, not after 40 billion dead." The communication channel fell silent except for the shocked breathing of alien diplomats who had just witnessed something that went against 10,000 years of galactic law. "Threat eliminated," Admiral announced to the assembled council fleet. "The children of 3 billion dead can rest safely now." The silence that followed lasted 37 minutes. No alien spoke, no diplomat protested, no council member demanded explanations. They had all just watched humanity cross a line that no galactic species had ever crossed before, the line between justice and mercy. And none of them were sure which side of that line civilization was supposed to be on. The Great Hall of Justice on the Council's central station had never seen anything like this. Built to handle diplomatic disputes and trade disagreements, it now hosted the most important trial in galactic history. Every seat was filled, and millions more beings across the galaxy watched through live broadcasts. Ambassador Sarah sat alone at the defendant's table, representing not just herself but her entire species. Across from her, Prosecutor Az adjusted his robes with all 6 of his arms as he prepared to address the tribunal. The 3 judges looked down from their elevated platform. Chief Justice from the Ancient Wisdom Keepers, Justice Ran representing the younger species, and Justice L from the Peaceful Alliance. Together, they would decide whether humanity had committed the greatest crime in galactic history. "The charges are severe," announced Chief Justice, his voice carrying the weight of 10,000 years of judicial tradition. "The species known as humanity stands accused of genocide, violation of species sovereignty, destruction of sapient life, and the unprecedented crime of undermining galactic diplomatic law." Prosecutor Az rose to his feet, his multiple arms gesturing dramatically. "Honorable judges, in all our history, no species has ever completely destroyed another species, while that species was attempting to surrender. The humans have set a precedent that threatens the very foundation of civilized society." He activated a holographic display showing the system battle. The images showed Devourer bioships broadcasting surrender signals, while human weapons systematically destroyed them. The defendants claim they were protecting innocent life, as continued. "But by what authority does any species decide that another species has no right to exist? Who gave humans the power to judge which beings deserve life and which deserve death?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the packed gallery. Many aliens nodded their approval at the prosecutor's words. The logic seemed clear. No species should have the power to exterminate another, regardless of their reasons. When it came time for the defense, Ambassador stood slowly. She had refused legal representation, insisting on speaking for her own species. The chamber fell silent as she walked to the center of the floor. "Honorable judges," she began, her voice clear and steady, "I will not insult your intelligence by denying what we did. Humanity deliberately and systematically destroyed every member of the Devourer species. We killed them all." Gasps and shocked murmurs filled the gallery. Even her own admission was unprecedented in council history. "But before you judge us," continued, "I ask you to consider what we destroyed." She activated her own holographic display. Instead of battle footage, it showed something much more disturbing, a comprehensive list of every world the Devourers had consumed over the past 1,000 years. Prime population, 1 billion, consumed over 40 years while the Council negotiated territorial agreements. Survivors, 300. The first hologram showed a beautiful blue world teeming with life, then the same world reduced to a dead rock. 7 population, 500 million, consumed over 20 years during peace talks. Survivors 12. Another world appeared, then disappeared into the feeding machines of the bioships. New Melbourne, population 2 billion, consumed over 30 years while the Council arranged resource-sharing protocols. Survivors 47. Continued reading, world after world, civilization after civilization. The numbers were staggering. With each entry, the gallery grew quieter and more uncomfortable. Total dead over the past 1,000 years of council negotiations with the Devourers, 47,600,000,000 people. Total survivors, 8,234. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Let the numbers hang in the air before continuing. My species has a concept called responsibility to protect, she said, looking directly at the judges. When faced with genocide, we believe that neutrality becomes complicity. Objection. Prosecutor has jumped to his feet. The defendant is trying to justify mass murder with philosophical arguments. Overruled, said Chief Justice quietly. Continue, Ambassador. Nodded and activated another display. I would like to call survivor testimony. What happened next changed everything. The first witness was a young female named A. She was one of only 300 survivors of her species, and she looked barely more than a child by human standards. As she took the witness platform, her translator picked up the slight tremor in her voice. My name is of the people, she began. I am 23 years old. I have been living in refugee camps for my entire life because I was being eaten before I was born. The chamber was absolutely silent as she continued. The council told us to be patient while they negotiated with the creatures that were eating my family. They said violence wasn't the answer. They said we had to find a peaceful solution that respected everyone's rights. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. For 23 years, I watched the emergency broadcasts as more of my people disappeared. Every few months, the council would announce another breakthrough in negotiations. The Devourers would agree to eat us more slowly, or maybe skip the nursery planets where our children lived. She turned to look directly at the judges. And every month, millions more of my people died, while the council celebrated their diplomatic progress. A's translator picked up the sound that was probably crying, though aliens couldn't be sure. The humans stopped them in 4 days, she said simply. 4 days. After 40 years of my people being eaten alive, the humans ended it in 4 days. She looked around the packed courtroom. You want to put them on trial for murder. Where was this court when my family was being murdered for 40 years? Where were you? The second witness was even more devastating. An elderly named K, representing one of only 12 survivors of his species, spoke in a voice broken by decades of loss. I lost my children, my great, he said. 6 generations of my family fed to those things while the council told me to be patient and trust the peace process. He looked directly at Prosecutor as, you want to talk about the right to exist? What about my great-grandson's right to exist? He was 3 years old when they ate him. Did anyone ask if he consented to being dinner? One after another, survivors. Each story was the same. Decades of watching their species slowly consumed, while the council arranged endless negotiations and territorial agreements. Dr. On was called as an expert witness to explain human psychology. But after listening to hours of survivor testimony, his previous conclusions seemed to have changed. Upon further study, he told the court, I no longer believe humans suffer from a psychological disorder. This caused an uproar in the gallery. The prosecutor demanded an explanation. After reviewing the testimony we've heard today, Dr. On continued, I believe humans may be the galaxy's only species that evolved with what they call moral clarity, the ability to distinguish between survival and justice. He paused, his tentacles moving in what his species showed when delivering important information. The rest of us evolved to survive through compromise and negotiation. We learned to live with threats by finding ways to manage them, but humans seem to have evolved the ability to recognize when compromise itself becomes immoral. Justice Rand leaned forward. Explain that, Doctor. Every species in this galaxy learned to negotiate with the Devourers because fighting them was dangerous and costly, On replied. But humans seem to understand something the rest of us missed. Sometimes the cost of not fighting is higher than the cost of fighting. He gestured toward the survivor section of the courtroom. While we were calculating acceptable losses and arranging territorial concessions, 40 billion people died. The humans didn't see those as acceptable losses. They saw them as people who deserved protection. Chief Justice asked the question that everyone was thinking. Doctor, in your professional opinion, are humans a threat to galactic peace? Dr. On considered this carefully before answering. Honorable Justice, I believe humans are a threat to galactic peace as we have defined it. But after today, I'm no longer certain that our definition of peace was correct. He looked around the packed courtroom. We built a civilization that valued stability over justice, compromise over protection of the innocent. We called it peace, but for 40 billion people, it was just a different kind of war, one where only one side was allowed to fight. The trial continued for 3 more days, but the outcome was already clear. The survivors had asked a question that shattered the foundation of galactic civilization. If protecting innocent life was a crime, then what kind of civilization were they protecting? When the verdict came, it would change everything. 6 months after the trial that shook the galaxy, the Galactic Council chamber looked very different. The same seats held the same species, but the conversations had changed completely. Where once there had been endless debates about territorial concessions and resource-sharing agreements, now there were heated discussions about something the galaxy had never really considered before: right and wrong. Ambassador Sarah sat in her usual seat, but she was no longer the quiet newcomer who had walked out of a council session in disgust. 36 species had formally requested what they now called human protection protocols for their borders. Another 50 had quietly asked for copies of human military doctrine and ethical guidelines. The change hadn't happened overnight, but it had been dramatic. Pirates, who had operated for centuries under various council-negotiated commerce agreements, had suddenly found themselves facing human patrol ships that didn't bother taking prisoners. Slavers discovered that human rescue operations didn't recognize territorial boundaries or diplomatic immunity. The infamous Orion Nebula incident had made everything clear to the criminal elements of the galaxy. The humans didn't just refuse to negotiate with evil, they actively hunted it down. Chairman Al called the session to order, his 4 arms moving in gestures that seemed less confident than they used to. The past 6 months had been hard on the traditional diplomatic establishment. Many of the older negotiators had retired or resigned rather than adapt to the new reality. First item of business, Al announced, is the request from the Refugee Coalition for full species restoration rights and territorial protection under the new Terran Doctrine. Stood to address the Assembly. The Terran Doctrine had been formalized after her species was unanimously acquitted of all charges in the Devourer trial. The Council had not only cleared humanity of wrongdoing, they had officially adopted the human approach to dealing with non-negotiable threats. The Terran Federation accepts guardianship responsibility for the people, announced. We will provide military protection for their resettlement efforts and guarantee their territorial sovereignty against any future aggression. What she didn't say, but everyone understood, was that this protection came with human standards of justice. Any species that threatened them would face the same fate as the Devourers. Mediator Al, who had somehow managed to keep his position despite his role in trying to negotiate with the Devourers, spoke up from his tank. Ambassador, the Council appreciates human protection services, but we remain concerned about the permanence of your solutions. Is there no room for rehabilitation or reform in human justice? Turn to face the jellyfish-like diplomat. 6 months ago, this same alien had been trying to arrange territorial concessions for creatures that ate children. Now he was asking about rehabilitation. Mediator Al, she replied, humans believe in rehabilitation and second chances. We have extensive programs for criminal reform and restorative justice. She paused, letting the chamber settle. But we draw a clear line between criminals and what we call enemies of life itself. Someone who steals can be rehabilitated. Someone who murders children for food cannot be reformed. They can only be stopped. The distinction had become central to the new galactic order. The Council now maintained two different protocols: traditional diplomacy for rational conflicts and what they called the human response for threats to innocent life. Dr. On, who had become something of a celebrity after his testimony at the trial, was seated in the scientific advisory section. His studies of human psychology had evolved into a broader examination of what he called moral courage, and he had made disturbing discoveries about its absence in most galactic species. "If I may address the Council," he said, rising from his seat. "Please proceed, Doctor," Al replied. "My ongoing research into human ethical development has revealed something significant," On announced. "Humans appear to be unique in their willingness to sacrifice immediate safety for abstract moral principles." He activated a holographic display showing comparative data from dozens of species. Every other species in our galaxy evolved survival strategies based on avoiding or managing threats through compromise. When faced with a superior predator, we learned to negotiate territorial boundaries or resource-sharing arrangements. The data showed thousands of years of diplomatic solutions to various galactic conflicts. But humans evolved in an environment where their primary threats were other intelligent beings, other humans. They learned that some conflicts cannot be managed through compromise because the opposing side has fundamentally incompatible values. Found herself nodding as the doctor continued his explanation. "This gave humans something the rest of us lack, the ability to recognize when negotiation itself becomes immoral," On said. "While we were calculating acceptable losses, humans were asking a different question entirely. Not, how do we survive this threat, but how do we eliminate this threat forever?" Young aliens throughout the galaxy had begun asking similar questions, had received thousands of communications from alien students wanting to study at human universities, to learn about concepts like moral courage and ethical absolutes that their own educational systems had never taught. The real change, though, was happening in the younger generation of galactic species. They called themselves the New Ethics Movement, and their ideas were spreading rapidly through alien societies. A delegation of young aliens had requested permission to address the Council and watched with interest as they took the floor. Their leader was a young hegemony female named Ra, daughter of a prominent Council diplomat. "Honorable Council members," Ra began, her voice strong and clear, "we represent the first generation to grow up after the Devourer extinction. We are the first generation to grow up knowing that evil can be stopped permanently." She looked directly at the older diplomats, including her own father. "Our parents taught us to negotiate, to compromise, to find peaceful solutions to every problem. But the humans taught us something our parents never learned. Some problems don't have peaceful solutions." The chamber was completely silent as she continued. "We have reviewed the historical records. For 10,000 years, this council has negotiated with pirates, slavers, planet burners, and child killers. You called it peace, but it wasn't peace. It was just organized cowardice." Several older council members began to protest, but the young alien continued speaking. "The humans showed us that there's a difference between wisdom and fear. Wisdom knows when to negotiate and when to fight. Fear negotiates with everything because fighting is dangerous. She gestured toward the human section. We want to learn from the humans. We want to learn how to stand for something absolute, how to protect innocent life even when it's difficult, how to choose what's right over what's safe. Chairman Al had remained quiet during the young alien's speech, but now he rose to respond, was surprised to see that his posture had changed. The proud, confident diplomat of 6 months ago had been replaced by someone who looked genuinely thoughtful. Ambassador, he said, I believe I owe your species an apology. This caused a stir throughout the chamber. Council chairman didn't apologize to member species. 6 months ago, I thought humans were dangerous because you refused to compromise, Al continued. I thought your inability to negotiate with evil was a flaw in your species' development. He paused, his forearms gesturing in what had learned was the hegemony sign for profound respect. I was wrong. We have governed through compromise but watching your people has made me realize that some things should never be compromised. He looked around the chamber at representatives from hundreds of species. The humans didn't come to the stars to become another species that looks the other way when children are murdered. They came to make the galaxy worthy of children's dreams. The chamber erupted in discussion as aliens began debating among themselves, but could see the change that had been building for months finally crystallizing into something permanent. The council voted unanimously to establish the new protocols: traditional diplomacy for rational conflicts, human intervention for crimes against innocent life. The galaxy would never again spend decades negotiating with child killers while billions died. As the session ended and aliens filed out in animated conversation, Chairman Al approached privately. Ambassador, he said quietly, I have a question that's been bothering me for months. What's that, Mr. Chairman? Before humanity joined the council, how did your species handle evil within your own civilization? Smiled at the question. Mr. Chairman, we've been fighting evil for our entire history. Joining the galaxy didn't change that, it just gave us a bigger area to protect. As she walked back to her quarters, reflected on how much had changed. The humans had come to the stars expecting to learn from ancient alien wisdom. Instead, they had ended up teaching the galaxy something it had forgotten, that some principles are worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. The galaxy was learning to sleep soundly again, knowing that somewhere among the stars, someone was willing to stand guard against the dark, and that someone was teaching others to do the same. For the first time in 10,000 years, evil couldn't count on good people to do nothing. The universe was becoming a very dangerous place to be a monster.